Well, welcome everybody. I want to thank you for joining us today. I'm Stephen Locke, Executive Director of the Michigan Statewide Independent Living Council. Joining us to discuss disability and accessibility in the arts is Gaelynn Lea, an American folk singer, violinist, public speaker, and disability advocate from Duluth, Minnesota. She was the winner of NPR Music's Tiny Desk Concert Contest in 2016. Gaelynn has captivated audiences worldwide with her original songs and violin playing. Most recently, Gaelynn composed and performed the music for Macbeth on Broadway starring Daniel Craig. She is a disability advocate and a highly sought after public speaker, sharing her perspective on shows including the PBS NewsHour, the Moth Radio Hour, the Science of Happiness podcast, and has 2 widely viewed TEDx talks. Gaelynn is also a co-founder of Ramped, Recording Artists and Music Professionals with Disabilities, which is a coalition seeking to amplify disability culture, promote inclusion, and advocate for accessibility in the music industry. She's currently writing a memoir about her touring adventures and disability advocacy. Gaelynn, I am thrilled to welcome you to our very first live Facebook event and want to thank you so much for joining us today.
Hello, thanks so much, Steve. It's nice to see you and to be here online with all of your folks from the State Independent Living Council.
It's great to see you, Gaelynn. The last time I saw you was about 4 years ago at a show that you were doing when you were touring with industrial supergroup Pigface, and I told you I wanted to get you here to Michigan to be a keynote speaker in some way, and I'm so happy that we have you here today.
Yeah, this is awesome. It worked out. Thanks for doing this.
Awesome. So I understand that your parents exposed you to music and acting with their dinner theater. What do you first remember realizing when you had a strong musical aptitude, and how did you go about cultivating it?
Well, so you're right. I was raised around a lot of musical theater through my parents, but the music, the love of music, so it was always kind of a part of my identity. Like it was our family sang a lot. We were exposed to music in all sorts of ways. But then when um, when I was 9, an orchestra came to my school and they played for us, and I just fell in love with the sound of all the strings together and the noise that it was just such a beautiful resonance, I guess, that I had never heard before. And so I decided to join, but I didn't know, musical aptitude wasn't really a thing I was thinking about yet. But then the next year, in order to join orchestra, you had to take a music listening test. And I was the only student that year that got a perfect score. So the teacher was like, well, we should try to find a way to help her play because that's something that I think she could be really good at. So it was sort of the teacher recognizing that it was important to get me involved, and then her creativity um, to help me find a different way to play. So I play violin up and down like a small cello. I mean, I know you've seen me, but folks on here haven't necessarily. And so, yeah, I play very differently, and that's because a teacher helped me figure it out. So um, the journey started, yeah, 5th grade was really when I fell in love with music and kind of started taking it in my own direction.
That's awesome. So you've made it to Broadway as a composer. You won NPR's Tiny Desk Concert Series contest, played South by Southwest, and also co-founded Recording Artists and Music Professionals with Disabilities. What have you experienced in terms of access in the arts and entertainment industries? What changes would you like to see? And how do you envision Ramped as being a catalyst for change?
Yeah, that's a great question. Well, to start with the accessibility piece of it, a lot of the reason I got into arts advocacy specifically is I started touring after the Tiny Desk and recognizing that a lot of venues were not accessible. Most of the stages I was playing, somebody had to lift my wheelchair on stage. A lot of the bathrooms weren't accessible. Almost none of the rooms ever are accessible. Like, you basically just I was always getting ready in the public restroom or whatever because there just was no place to go before a show. And I started thinking, well, this is kind of messed up. Like, what if, I'm small, so like people can lift my chair up if they had to and then lift me up, but it wasn't really a great solution for most people, right? So most people would just not be able to access that space. And then the more I thought about it as I kept going on the road, because we toured for like 3 solid years before COVID, like all year long, basically. Is it started dawning on me that if a person with a disability wanted to get to my show, would they be able to enjoy themselves? Would they feel welcome there? And so access became more and more of a priority in my personal touring life. And so eventually I said I'm not going to play at inaccessible venues. And if the venue doesn't have a ramp to the stage, I'm going to play on the floor. I think actually the show that I met you, I might have been on the floor for that show. I was. Yep. And so I kind of got this growing awareness. And so then, luckily, I mean, not luckily, the pandemic was terrible, obviously, but the goodness that came out of that is that a lot of disabled artists started getting asked to do online discussions about accessibility. And so I was obviously one of those artists, but another artist named Lachi, she's an EDM artist from New York City. She's blind, a Black singer songwriter. She was also on a lot of these panels, and we started talking afterwards about how we all know that the problems are there. She has different issues than I do because she has vision loss and stuff, but still access is important to her too. And so we started talking about, is there a social network, like what other artists are out there that we might not even know about who are struggling with these same barriers, and who's there to support them? Because you would bring these issues up at like a conference for musicians, and they would be like, yeah, we've never really thought of this before. So it was kind of like nobody was addressing it. And that's why we started Ramped is, it was sort of like there's a big need for people like us not to have to be alone, struggling to raise not just awareness, but also go about their own careers, like it was a lot. And so having that support network has been really cool. And then the other thing that Ramped has done, which is part of the vision, is to kind of amplify this idea of disability culture, that disability is actually the reason I make the music I make. It's not like a despite my disability I created something cool. It was like it's part of your identity as a cultural group kind of. And so to discuss disability culture in that way gets music organizations like South by Southwest or the Grammys or other places thinking about, like, oh, well, we want to have diversity in our programming, but have we ever thought about disability before? And a lot of times they haven't. So this is like kind of giving them a place to start. So I think the goal of Ramped is to kind of elevate disability culture and accessibility as like priorities in a lot of these pre-existing organizations that have never really dealt with it before.
I remember being at that show in Pontiac where you performed in front of a stage, and that really made me a little bit angry that they did not have the accessibility there. And I was so glad to see Ramped created to address this issue going forward.
Yeah.
The next question I have is, the Centers for Independent Living that we partner with assist people of all ages with disabilities, including parents raising children. As someone who grew up with a disability, were there any people or organizations who you feel were crucial to helping you realize your potential from childhood on and ultimately start achieving your goals?
Yeah, yes, I have several things come to mind when you say that. I've already kind of mentioned my teacher, right? The one who helped me adapt the instruments. I think a lot of times teachers feel that maybe they need to be skilled in disability or music therapists, but a lot of times they just have to be willing to ask questions and try things and say, is it possible that this might work? And so I got lucky that way. My parents were hugely supportive, and so I would urge anyone who has disabled kids to just be open minded and support your kid in trying to follow their dream and be creative. My parents really let me experiment with all sorts of different things so that I didn't feel like my disability was a limitation. It was just kind of part of who I was. Another thing that it comes to mind is actually the Centers for Independent Living. So, unfortunately, and this is a big deal, and I think it's something that needs to change. I was enrolled in all the programs that I knew about through the county, like, Social Security, SSI, when I was a kid, teenager, well, I guess 18 forward. I had Medicaid. I was enrolled in programs, but I didn't know what else was out there until I started working at a center for independent living. I worked at one briefly, and and all of a sudden you realize like, oh, I could maybe be eligible for like help getting a van made accessible, stuff that I wasn't getting told. And so I think there is a big communication gap because at the counties, people are often, I don't know if it's that they're overworked or they don't realize that nobody is telling you what's out there. You either kind of stumble your way into it or you just don't find out about it, and then you don't get access to services you need. And so Center for Independent Living was actually, even though I was an employee there, a place where I learned about like personal care assistance. So like my husband helps me now, but at the time we were both working full-time jobs at different places, and it was difficult in the evening for me to get all the stuff I needed done. I didn't know that I was eligible or like that was something that I could pursue. And so the Centers for Independent Living kind of educated me. I feel like it should come from the counties too. Like, you should have an evaluation every year where they talk about, did you know about this? Do you know about this? But that doesn't happen practically very often. So Center for Independent Living have really important knowledge to distill and to share with disabled people. And so if you're not hooked up with one, like for sure, that is something I would recommend every parent or person with a disability do at some point.
Unfortunately, Centers for Independent Living are still one of the best kept secrets in our country, and we really need to get the word out there about them. Our council is working on statewide outreach to increase public knowledge about independent living and the resources that they have in their centers for independent living. So I'm really glad to hear that.
Hmm.
How do you like to describe your sound? Are there any specific themes that influence your compositions, and what collaborations have you been involved in with other musicians?
That's a great question. So at heart, I am a folk artist, right? I did a lot of Celtic folk music, traditional fiddle tunes, during college and after college, and so I love that genre of music. I grew up obsessed with like Simon and Garfunkel and Wilco and the Decemberists and all sorts of folky lyrical artists, and but my sound is because it's a violin that's layered up with a looping pedal. My sound is very layered and a little bit experimental, so it's like still folk, but it's got other influences that come in and out. And collaborations that I've done have mostly been with like at this point in time bandmates that I met through Minnesota. Like I have one album that's a full band project, but I'm hoping that as time continues, especially with the creation of Ramped, that there will be chance for future collaborations and projects between the Ramped members. Like I think that that's something I want to see happen more and more is now that disabled artists can find each other, that we can actually start making some cool stuff together.
Absolutely. I know that you are friends of Alan Sparhawk and Mimi Parker from Low, and we recently lost Mimi, and that was absolutely tragic.
Yeah.
Fortunate enough to see Low about 4 or 5 times play live. Can you talk a little bit about your time with them and the musical collaborations you did with them?
Yeah, and I agree. It's a huge loss, not just to the music community, but to the world. Like Mimi was really a special person, and it's been tough to it's been tough to accept that she is gone. Um, Musically, I guess I met Alan way back in 2011. I've done a lot more with him than I have with Mimi, although we would see them on the road and kind of touch base, and she was always kind of like a guidance counselor kind of person. She would like, you tell her what's up and she would give you some suggestions or whatever. She was really cool. But Alan and I met in 2011. I was jamming at a farmer's market with a friend of his named Charlie Parr, and he's a blues, folk blues artist from Duluth as well. We're all from Duluth, Minnesota. So and he saw me jamming and he noticed, oh, that girl can play by ear because that's something that I love to do is improvise. And so he called me up out of the blue a few weeks later. I didn't know who he was. I was familiar with the name Low and I had heard some of their music, but I wasn't like a super fan. So at the time I hadn't done a lot of research into who he was, but he had gotten in touch with me and said, I want to do an instrumental project with you on a silent film. So it was a Lon Chaney film. And he was wondering if I would play live at this movie theater with him. And what he suggested, he said, I want to use a looping pedal on your violin, and then I want you to just play harmonies to what you hear. So he was operating the pedal, and I was just improvising. But then eventually, so we did that project. We had a lot of fun and we decided to form a band. It's called The Murder of Crows. And so that's our band together that we played very actively through like maybe 2014, 2015. And then we do stuff once in a while now just for fun. But we played a lot of shows and made an album in 2012. And as I said, he was the guy operating the looping pedal. I had not even heard of a looping pedal at this point. He brought it in and I was like, what is that? And so, anyways, probably 4 or 5 months after we started playing together, he brought me a looping pedal and an amp and said, you need to learn how to do this because someday you can do shows by yourself. And I thought that was ridiculous. I was like, haha, yeah, right, basically in my head. But I took the equipment and I did start working with it, and it was hard. Like, looping is very timing specific and it just takes a while to learn. If you've ever tried and given up an hour later, you should not give up because it took a couple of years really to get like proficient at it. And so I started working with the pedal, and then as I started writing songs, we were still playing together a lot. So I would run my songs by him as they were being created, and he would offer feedback. He was like a really, really important person to me musically to like have that feedback in real time. And we performed a lot of my early songs together actually as the Murder of Crows. So he was just hugely influential in me as well. And then getting to see them live. I mean, I've seen them live a lot of times now, just because we even got to tour. I opened for them in Ireland for 3 shows, and like just very good memories. They were phenomenal because they were just so in sync with each other. That band. I mean, it's really it was really powerful music, and especially live for me. I mean, I know their albums are amazing, but seeing them live was just so it was just so cool. Like something about that was just really kind of out of this world. Most people are not that in sync and like intentional about what they do on stage, but it still felt creative. It was just really cool. So that's been rough.
I'm so glad you mentioned Charlie Parr. I have a signed CD of his. I saw him open up for Low in Detroit, and I was so impressed by him. He was so humbled when I walked up to him and asked him to sign that, and I told him how incredible it was. And his bandmate on the washboard, it was
Oh
absolutely
yeah.
incredible and enthralling. I was just so impressed by that.
Yeah, Charlie is actually so, I knew who Lo was. It wasn't a huge awareness for me. The person I followed obsessively in Duluth was Charlie. Like I went to like all his shows. And when I first, like my very first folk project in Duluth, when we made like a live CD, I gave him a copy of the album. Like, I was like fangirl for Charlie Parr, hardcore. Like he's so amazing though. So yes, if you haven't listened to him, it's Parr. Look up Charlie Parr. He's so great.
Charlie Parr, absolutely. So it's clear from your blogs, Gaelynn, and interviews that aside from your music advocacy, you're very interested in helping government leaders understand the needs of people with disabilities in order to promote equity and access, and even considered becoming a lawyer prior to starting your music career. What policy or legislative ideas do you believe would be life-changing for many people within the disability community?
So many. So
You know,
yeah, yeah. I guess the biggest thing I feel is like it's really unfortunate that we created the legislation in the ADA, but then we don't fund it. Like I see your hands. Yeah, and so I think that that is probably one of the biggest, it would be a really big game changer. And actually, in Minnesota, we are working on a bill through the state level, not a national bill, but through our state legislature to get some arts funding that would be set aside specifically for small nonprofit art venues to be able to get funding to make accessibility improvements. And so it would just be like a pot of money where they could apply. And then actually use that money. It hasn't been passed yet, and that's like the first step, right? Like nonprofits is the first step, but a big part of the barriers to society is not about not being able to get into nonprofits. It's about not being able to get into the small businesses like for profits, grocery stores, all of these places that people need to go that aren't always accessible. So that's the biggest thing. And then I think another really big part of it is allowing flexibility in funding. Like, I mean, like the asset limits are ridiculously low. If you are in this community, you know that like I one time had a retirement account that I had to cash out and buy a computer because it was at $2,002. It was over my SSI limit, you know? And I was like, you do see the irony of this, right? To the person on the phone. And she's like, I do. I mean, like, it's not like people don't know, but we haven't actually changed the laws to reflect what all of us in the community know that they're not fair and they don't promote independence. A lot of times, asset limits and income guidelines really actually do more harm for our community than they do good. And then the other thing is, I just want to see more elected officials in the disability community getting up into the ranks of power because I don't know if you remember when what was that called, like 529 or something, but the bill that was meant to weaken the ADA recently, it was up for debate. And by recently, I mean pre-pandemic, but like 2018 probably, um, where it was meant to weaken the ADA and make it easier for businesses to like like put off adjusting to become more accessible. And if you didn't follow that, I wish I had the exact number, HR 529 maybe. But the thing is Tammy Duckworth, who's a disabled senator, is like the reason it didn't pass because even Democrats were on board because they have pushback from small businesses who don't want to invest money. So it's a couple problems. Like part of it is why are we not funding small businesses to become accessible as a government? Like if we're going to make it a law, we should help make it possible to do it. But then on the other hand, like we need more leaders in our government who understand that you can't just make a change to a civil rights protection law. Like we can't stand for that in America. And I think if she hadn't been in the Senate, I really think that that could have passed, and it would have been really, really detrimental. So the balance of power is very um, tenuous. You know what I mean? Like we don't have a lot of wiggle room. So when things are on the line, it's really important for places like Centers for Independent Living to do everything in their power to make their voices heard because unfortunately disability hasn't reached the critical awareness level I think that it needs to in government. And I think a lot of it is people just don't understand. We don't talk about it enough in our culture. They don't realize like what would it feel like in these people's shoes? Like, what is the practical day-to-day life? If you limit people, it's not about my body so much as if I can't get a new wheelchair, like then I'm in trouble. You know what I mean? So, um, yeah, I guess I would love to see the ADA funded, and I would love to see asset limits and income guidelines be less restrictive, especially if you can get proof that you're disabled. I mean, I'm going to be disabled forever. I still have to recertify every 7 years, which is the longest amount of time that I can certify to stay on Medicaid. I'm fine to do that, I guess, but it's like, why do we have to have so much bureaucracy for people who are going to be disabled forever? A lot, there's definitely temporary disabilities, but it's like it's not a one size fits all solution. I hope that answers your question.
So I have a friend who has a master's degree in public administration, who is permanently disabled. And because of their personal care needs with personal care attendants, they would have to make 6 figures just to get off Medicaid. And it's a trap. It's a trap for people with disabilities that have significant disabilities. And there's got to be a change in those federal laws at some point.
I agree. I
Yeah,
agree.
that's a perfect segue into, I know that you were really good friends with Judy Human, who we tragically lost recently. She was such an incredible international disability advocate. I want to ask you, what advice do you have for youth with disabilities in terms of developing our next generation of leaders in the independent living movement?
Well, yeah, I mean, she made me think of a lot. Like I got to go to her funeral online. I think if any, I mean, I think it's still up there if you want to watch it or whatever. But I took a lot away from learning. I mean, I met her twice in person, and she kept in touch over the phone. And the thing that I'm left with when I think about Judy is that she was really, really about connecting people, about like keeping in touch, and about how our collective, like everybody's got a part to play. You know what I mean? So as a disability, I guess that what I would say for the youth, and actually more so for like our generation, like I'm almost 40 now, right? And there's people who are coming after me and there's people who are above me. And so in terms of age and like generationally, and I think the thing that Judy understood so well is that even if it looks like, oh, there's this leader in the community, right? There are people all around them that are making change possible. Like it's really important to keep and build and cherish the connections that you have in your community, and not get fall to the trap of like it's a one person show. You got to be the star of the show. Really, it takes all of us to do this work, and all of us have a slightly different angle that's important and valid, and so we can just be working together. What I've heard so much from people who knew Judy, and what resonates with me because I feel the same way, is she would always just check in. And I think sometimes we get so focused on either whatever it is, social media or just like our work, and like we're always busy, 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 that we don't take time to check in with each other and just be like, hey, how's it going? How's your family? Anything fun coming up? Like just kind of remembering that we're all people, and that we all have important roles to play, and that it's important to keep those connections healthy. I kind of think about this a lot in terms of like what good is it if we all have disability rights if we're all like siloed and like like alone. Like it's really important that we make it a collective thing so that we have the rights that we want, but also the community that we're all looking for too. So she was a good example of that. She just went above and beyond, I think, to connect people and to keep in touch, and I think that was really cool.
Well, thank you so much. We're coming in close on the end of our time, and I have one final question for you.
Yeah.
You've spoken on TEDx about pursuing enrichment instead of progress as a more inclusive approach to life. How does that mindset affect your career and your broader life? And how do you envision that approach transforming our communities and society on a larger scale?
Yeah, if that's thank you for asking that question. So when I did that TEDx talk, it was just about this idea that our we are so focused on, goal oriented, like completing this project, doing this next thing, getting this promotion in our society, that we're all feeling this urge to push, push, push forward. And I think, it's really healthy to have goals for yourself and stuff, but it becomes an issue when you value yourself based on your accomplishments. I think it's really important to like step back and recognize that even if I release an album that everybody hates and it gets totally panned and I never get asked to play any concerts ever again, even if that were to happen, I'm not like a less valuable person, and I can still live an enriching life. I think the reason I call that like an inclusive mindset is that when you're focusing on what you're doing now is fine, and you should enjoy what you do and live in alignment with like what lights you up, what makes you passionate, but recognize that what you do is not who you are, and the way that you can live each day can make life enriching rather than having to wait until some future point when you accomplish this goal to be happy. The reason I think that's more inclusive is because at various points, like I break bones, and then all of a sudden, I'm certainly not doing what I thought I was going to be doing for the next 6 weeks while I lay around and heal. And if I felt less valuable during that period, or someone going through a health issue, not being able to work at the same pace they usually do, or not being able to pursue the exact same hobbies, I think it's more important to just think right now, what can I do that connects me with the things that I love? And it doesn't have to be a big outwardly show, like let me see if I can explain this a little better. But like, even if for some reason I can't play violin anymore, I can still connect to music by listening to music every day, or maybe composing songs in my head for fun. I don't have to have a traditional path towards connecting with my passions. And I think that's important for us to think about as a society, because even if you're not disabled now, if you live long enough, you're going to age to a place where your body's different and you're not going to be able to do what you were doing when you were 34. And so it's important to just think about what enriches my life, that I can, like, what can I carry into the future, just like touching it on a daily basis rather than thinking of everything as a goal to be accomplished. I think it includes more people, including the aging population and people with disabilities who might not be able to live in such a rigid, goal oriented society and feel valuable, where I think we're all valuable, and that the way we connect with the world around us on a daily basis can add a lot of beauty to our lives and to other people's lives, but it might not look like success on the outside the way we define it. Does that make sense?
We all come into this world in diverse ways, and it's about us being able to recognize those diversities and celebrate those,
Yep.
as opposed to separating ourselves based on those. There's so much to celebrate in humanity. And I know we're at the end of our segment, but do you have any parting words for the disability community or the public in general, from your perspective, on advancing disability rights going forward?
Yeah, I mean, I think the big push, I think, will be, can can we celebrate who we are enough? And by what I mean by that is, can we live from a place of joy about our own diversity, what you were speaking of with diversity? Can we accept ourselves so that it's so obvious that eventually people will start in, like, wider society, to recognize that disability is a form of diversity that can be celebrated but needs to be supported and acknowledged the way that any other form of diversity is. I think the big shift for disability rights is going to be when we get away from having to defend our inherent worth to just embracing disability as a form of diversity. And so, thinking of it in that way, as like, it's not an inherently negative thing. I think that when we can fully understand that for ourselves and then send that message forward, I think that's when we're going to start to see the next wave of change. The people like Judy Human, we owe them so much. I cannot even express how different life would be if they hadn't done their work. Like, I wouldn't have gone to public school. I wouldn't be able to get anywhere on the bus. I mean, I can't even fathom what the world would be like. And so maybe that's the last thing I'll leave you with is, you never know your impact, right? Like, you just got to keep doing the work every day, and do it from a place of self-worth, and don't feel bad about your disability. Embrace who you are, and know that you deserve, and so does everyone with a disability or not, to live in a society that accepts and values you, and supports what you need to survive. And so, in that way, just keep doing the work, and you just never know what your legacy is going to end up looking like. But without you, the world is a much poorer place. Like, without Judy, I mean, I'm so glad she didn't give up. So don't give up, because if people like Judy gave up, we would not be where we are now. And I just think our generation needs to keep that mindset of continuing. Just
I
keep
think
going.
probably the best advice to especially youth with disabilities: do not give up.
Oh,
Um, I so appreciate, Gaelynn, you taking the time to meet with us, and I am truly looking forward to the next time we connect, because there is going to be another time when we connect.
yes,
Thank you
there will.
for the work that you're doing, for the beauty that you bring into this world. We celebrate you. Thank you so
Oh.
much for being a part of our first Facebook Live event.
Thank you so much. Take care. Thank you.
And we'll be in touch, okay?
Yes, awesome. Take care. Thank
Have a
you.
good thing.
You too. Bye.
Okay, bye-bye.